Is there a white genocide in South Africa?
No, there's no sign of it, never has been. In fact, whites are economically the strongest group. They benefited from democracy more than anybody else. 64% of all boardrooms in South Africa are still white. The average income of white South Africans are vastly higher than black South Africans. No. They have better schools, they have better education, they have private health care. This is the land of milk and honey if you're white.
Has any land been expropriated in South Africa without compensation since the first all-race election in this country?
I'm not aware of anyone. Not a single farm that I'm aware of was expropriated without compensation since 1994.
So how do we interpret President Trump's executive order?
It is possible that South Africa has offended the United States with his policy on the Palestinians, and it could be that with his policy on Russia, the ambiguities of those policies and its relationship with the Chinese. It could be. I think that does play a role. But there was something very, very sensitive that was touched upon. And in South Africa, right-wing groups, so-called civil society groups, we know that they have access to the Trump administration because they claim that. And if you listen to what Trump has said, it corresponds exactly with the genocide narrative that they sell and that they market, and that whites are victims of the democratic system and the constitution in South Africa and legislation. So there's an overlay, there's an immediate overlay, there's an unquestionable overlay between what Trump says and these right-wing groups have said. So I'm afraid I have to believe them when they say they have direct access to the Trump administration, and we see it in what
My take from last night, I thought Ramaphosa was exceptional. His charismatic personality came out, and he held his composure despite all the pressure. I thought he was unbelievable. I am sure Donald Trump is going to see through that. Steenhuisen, incredibly disappointing to sell out to South Africans just like that in front of world media. Anton Rupert, you're an absolute star. You tackled Mr. Steenhuisen, you highlighted the farm murders are not just crime, day-to-day crime. This is a group of critical for South Africa. Let's make South Africa great again.
How do you think, when you look at the rapport of the president and how he handled, this meeting, which was in front of all the cameras and in front of all the media, what do you make of how he handled himself and his rapport during this meeting?
Well, good evening to all the viewers out there. Well, to be honest, I'm actually somewhat disappointed in the manner of approach that Cyril Ramaphosa took, first and foremost with the delegation that he took there. I mean, the fact that you take most of the people that are owning companies like your Vodacoms, I mean, Rupert has got shares there, Cyril himself has shares in MTN. And these are the companies that, when you think about it, if Starlink was to come to South Africa, it would rival them. And Starlink initially had wanted not to have a base here at which it can then foster growth in terms of jobs and job creation and the likes, but instead it wanted to operate outside of South Africa. So now in that context, when you see that happening, you then become disappointed, because it means that there's also the question of money involved, because we can only ask ourselves the question that with all the propaganda and all the intelligence that the US has in its disposal, how do they think that there can be some sort of a genocide in South Africa? It really doesn't make sense. And when I look at it, I think Cyril Ramaphosa a bit was he allowed himself to be played by Trump, in the sense that now he's putting himself in a corner which now America will have to dictate everything. You do this, you do that, you speak to this man, you don't speak to him. And it's proven, because Rupert himself did say we need Starlink, and that only shows that there is still that capitalist agenda that is continuing to reshape and reform itself in South Africa.
All right, thank you so much, Tembi. So I'm also now going to bring in Angelique Tembegile. And Angelique, maybe let's start off with and talk about what Tembiso touched on, and that was the delegation that was alongside, or is alongside, President Ramaphosa during that meeting. I mean, the likes of Rupert as well. We also know that Johan Rupert is there. We also know the likes of golfers. Ernie Els is also forming part of this delegation. What do you make of those who are supporting the president during this visit?
Thank you, Mbali. So in terms of delegation, I think that Rupert, as an undeniable and undisputed representative of the private sector, is there as a form of economic diplomacy. And that is really good because it shows that this is not just political. We're actually looking for ways to advance ourselves, not just economically, but also in terms of our relations with other countries. And obviously, we're talking things like trade, we're talking investments, and as the successful businessman that he is, Rupert would have really, really proper insights on that. And then in terms of the golfers, I think that they are more of a cultural leverage because it's no secret that Trump loves golf. And even the president taking both of them, he asked for one of the two, and he said, actually, I'll bring both of them. And I think that is a form of cultural leverage, and you can use them as a soft power tool in order to just maybe soften Trump up and let the defenses down. Because he's already praising them, he's already giving them compliments, and he also brought him a golf book. So that's a very strategic development. I really do hope, though, that behind all the golf smiles, there is a proper strategy, because these are all white men, and they're not actually a representation of what South Africa looks like. We're one of the most unequal countries in the world. We have GBV, we have black poverty, we also have inequality. We're known for inequality. So having these white men going out there to represent us might not be a true reflection of who we are as a country, and that is a bit concerning. I just really do hope, though, that the meeting will be a success.
All right. Thank you so much, Angelique. I'm also going to bring in our last guest here, Kamohelo. Kamu, your expectations now that we know that this meeting, we've seen, just a glimpse of that meeting. They are now going to be behind closed doors to continue, discussing some bilateral relations between these two countries. What are your expectations in terms of the outcomes of this meeting?
Yeah, I think this is when the real meeting is going to start. What we saw there was Donald Trump keeping to the lie that there's a white genocide in South Africa, because he even brought in fake news from Twitter showing Julius Malema singing "Shoot the Boer," and was not willing to listen to anyone who was saying there is a crime problem in South Africa, but there's no targeted crime towards white farmers or white people in South Africa. And I also think that our president himself, in front of the world, failed to dispel this myth that white people are being targeted. South Africa is one of the only countries where those Boers, including the 49 Boers, will live in a better state more than they are living now as refugees in America. So I think we're looking at the outcomes of saying that the AGOA trade deal between the USA and South Africa must still be there. The tariffs must stay at 10%, if not lower. We must be able to speak about a relationship between the USA and South Africa that is beneficial to both parties. Our president failed to say what he said to us in Parliament. He said he was not going to be bullied, but that was just a spectacle of Trump perpetuating this idea in order for Sterling to come and for the USA to have a leverage over South Africa.
Kamohelo, thank you so much for your time. Of course, those are some of the views, Tembegile, we are hearing here from
in South Africa, and Donald Trump has just come on air to say that he has seen the terrible things going on in South Africa. I live here, and I haven't really seen the terrible things he speaks about. I'm continually amazed at the disinformation that this man sends. I'm amazed that anyone would believe him. We in South Africa are laughing. We honestly are. But what worries me most is that you Americans seem to believe him. Even statements about your own country, you believe that he's doing the best thing. I feel very sad for you and very down. I hope you can get this man out one way or the other.
So
Goodbye.
Do you think President Ramaphosa was prepared for President Trump to press him on this?
I have interesting views about whether I felt that South Africa's delegation was prepared, or at least prepared enough. I do think that they knew that they were walking into a trap.
They did, yeah, okay.
I don't think that they were clueless. They were confident. At times, I'd even say to them, it sometimes feels like a little bit too confident. We've seen what Donald Trump does. The one thing that's a marker of the US president right now is uncertain, unpredictable, and we tend to know that he relies on tricks to prove a point. And so I do think that they did understand. Did they expect to see a screen come Trump and a visual reference to what he's claiming is happening in South Africa? I don't think so. I also just very quickly, Jake, if you let me, want to speak about the visuals. You cannot for a second claim that there's genocide and that's what you produce. South Africa claims that there's genocide happening in Palestine, that Israel is guilty, goes to the ICJ, is asked to provide evidence of this. And what do? They provide wads and wads and wads of evidence. Donald Trump claims that there is supposedly a genocide in South Africa. What does he do to prove it? To put up chants of Julius Malema? Surely that devastation exists. In that particular room, you had South Africans saying, we have a problem. Crime is rampant in the country. You've had Zingiswa Losi, who's head of COSATU, which is the labor federation there, the largest one, describing the atrocities being visited upon the elderly women in South Africa. Everybody recognizes there's a problem. It isn't targeted at particular people. For the life of me, a president of the US, with everything he's got access to try and prove a point about what's happening, that's all you could produce today. I found that interesting.